The bookstore apartment above Meridian Books smelled like aged paper and possibility, which was a generous way of describing what was essentially the accumulated scent of decades of ink, dust, and the particular mustiness that comes from a building that had survived more Portland winters than anyone cared to count. Maya Chen stood in the doorway of her new bedroom, new to her, anyway. The paint on the walls was a faded cream that suggested it had been someone's bedroom since at least the early 2000s, and tried very hard to convince herself that moving back to her hometown was exactly what she needed. A fresh start, that's what she'd told everyone back in New York, the people who'd been expecting her to have made it by now, to have climbed some ladder that supposedly mattered. After 3 years in the city chasing a career in publishing that had burned out so spectacularly it had left her singed, cynical, and unable to even look at a manuscript without feeling a bone-deep exhaustion, she'd done the thing that felt like failure. She'd come home, back to Portland. Back to the place she'd spent her entire adolescence trying to escape. Her parents had offered her the guest house. Her mother had been diplomatic about it, which somehow made it worse, the careful way she'd phrased it, as if Maya were a bird with a broken wing that might startle easily. "We've put fresh linens on the bed," her mother had said, "and there's plenty of space. You can take as much time as you need to figure things out." Which really meant, "We're disappointed but we love you anyway, please don't embarrass us further by moving back in with us at 32. So instead she'd found this. A two-bedroom apartment above Meridian Books, the independent bookstore that had been a fixture of the Selwood neighborhood since the 80s, owned now by someone Maya had never met. Someone named River, according to the Craigslist listing, who seemed to have inherited the place from an aunt and now lived downstairs while renting out the upstairs to subsidize the bookstore's increasingly precarious finances. The rent was cheap. The location was good. The fact that it meant living directly above a bookstore, a place that represented everything about her failed career, was something Maya had chosen not to think too carefully about during the decision-making process. Now, standing in the bedroom that would be hers for an indeterminate amount of time, she'd given herself 6 months before reevaluating, a deadline that felt both impossibly far away and terrifyingly close. She had to confront the decision she'd made. The boxes surrounding her feet held the careful inventory of her life. Not much, really, when you consider that 3 years in New York was supposed to have meant something, supposed to have accumulated into a life. But Maya had been aggressive in her purging. She'd sold the furniture she'd bought off Craigslist, donated most of her clothes to a thrift store in Crown Heights where the cashier had looked at her pityingly, and shipped only essentials back to Portland. Books, of course, she couldn't get rid of the books, her laptop, her mother's old desk, some kitchen things, bedding. The sum total of a failed life, packed into cardboard and transported 3,000 miles. "So you got the upstairs bedroom." Maya jumped, spinning around so quickly her hair whipped across her face. A woman was leaning against the doorframe in that exact way Maya had been standing moments before, as if she'd been posed there deliberately to mirror Maya's own posture. She was petite, maybe 5'3" to Maya's 5'10", with an undercut that showed off intricate tattoos along her scalp, constellations, Maya realized, mapping out the night sky with the precision of an astronomer. Her overalls were paint-splattered, truly destroyed with color, and there was a smudge of what looked like cadmium yellow on her brown cheek. Her hair was natural, thick, cut close on one side, longer on top, and she had the kind of dark eyes that seemed to contain their own light source. This apparently was River. "Yeah," Maya said, trying to sound normal, which was difficult when she was acutely aware that she'd been caught looking at this woman like she was analyzing a painting in a museum. "I'm Maya Chen. I'm the upstairs roommate, I guess." The woman's handshake was firm, her grip warm, her smile unexpectedly genuine in a way that made Maya's chest tight in a way she immediately tried not to analyze. "River Okonkwo, downstairs. I own the bookstore and I live here because rent in Portland is apparently designed by someone with a vendetta against anyone who makes art for a living." She glanced at the boxes with the air of someone assessing a spatial design problem. "Need help. I'm decent at spatial organization. Spent years curating a bookstore after all." "I thought bookstores were about browsing chaos," Maya said, surprised by the ease of conversation which somehow made her even more nervous. She had a tendency to say things that made people leave rooms. It was one of her many flaws that had been thoroughly documented by her last therapist in New York. But River's grin widened and it transformed her entire face into something so open and genuine that Maya had to look away. "Yeah, well, that's intentional chaos. There's a difference. Looks random, but every book is exactly where it needs to be for someone to find it. It's like curating a conversation between books and people you know." Maya didn't know, not really, but she wanted to understand. She watched as River disappeared briefly and came back with her sleeves rolled up despite the Portland chill that seeped through the room's single window, and together they assembled Maya's life into the small space. It was comfortable work, not effortless exactly, because there was the problem of the desk that didn't want to fit through the doorway at the right angle, and the bookshelf that was slightly larger than either of them had anticipated. But easy in the way things can be when neither person feels the need to fill silence, when the quiet itself becomes a kind of conversation. River was strong in a way that surprised Maya, moving boxes with ease and suggesting furniture placement with a spatial intelligence that suggested years of solving exactly these kinds of problems. She had paint under her fingernails and her hands moved with an artist's precision. When she lifted one end of Maya's desk, one of her constellation tattoos caught the light and Maya found herself staring at the design. Cassiopeia, the vain queen, trapped in the sky as eternal punishment. "The astronomy thing?" River asked, catching Maya looking. "I got obsessed after a bad relationship, thought I'd immortalize something that couldn't leave me, plus there's something beautiful about stars that are dead. They look alive from where we stand but they're already gone, permanent distance," seemed fitting. It was the kind of thing that should have sounded pretentious when said aloud, but River delivered it with such casual honesty that it just sounded true. By the time the last box was stacked, books sorted by rough genre into the shelves River helped her assemble, clothes hanging in the small closet, the desk finally positioned under the room's only window which looked out onto SC Tacoma Street below. The sun had set over Portland's West Hills, turning the sky apricot and rose, the kind of color that made you believe briefly in redemption and new beginnings. "Welcome to the building," River said, brushing off her hands and heading for the stairs. She paused at the threshold. "Fair warning, I paint in the evenings sometimes. My studio is downstairs in what used to be the storeroom. If the smell of turpentine gets overwhelming, just yell or text, or bang on the floor, whatever feels natural." "I like the smell of turpentine," Maya found herself saying, which was perhaps too much information to share with someone she just met, but it was true. There was something about that sharp, chemical bite of it that felt honest. Real. River paused on the stairs, her hand on the railing, and for just a moment, maybe a quarter second, maybe less, something flickered across her face. Something that looked like recognition, or maybe hope, or maybe Maya was projecting because it had been 3 years since anyone had looked at her like she'd said something that mattered. "Yeah," River said, and her voice was softer. "That's good, that's really good." Then she was gone, her footsteps heading down the narrow stairs, and Maya was alone in her new bedroom, surrounded by boxes and possibility and the faint smell of turpentine already seeping up through the floorboards. Living above a bookstore had rhythms that Maya had never anticipated. She'd imagined it would be mostly quiet. That she'd spend her time in the apartment reading and trying to figure out what came next, using the bookstore only as a means to pay rent. Instead, she found herself acutely aware of the building's pulse, the way it breathed and lived and existed around her. River opened at 9 every morning, a time that Maya discovered in her first week by waking to the soft sound of the lock turning downstairs, the gentle chime of the security system being disarmed. There was always music after that. River's taste in music was eclectic and beautiful, ranging from John Coltrane to Phoebe Bridgers to obscure indie folk artists that Maya had never heard of. The music would drift up through the floorboards, filtered through decades of wood and nail and history, and become part of the morning's texture. By 10, the smell of coffee would arrive, rich and complex, suggesting that River took her coffee seriously. By noon, the first real conversation would typically start. Maya could hear the murmur of customers, River's voice answering questions, the sound of the register. The afternoon was quieter, the rhythm shifting to a slower pace. Sometimes there would be long stretches of silence, and Maya imagined River shelving books, or sitting at the front counter reading, or doing whatever it was that bookstore owners did when there weren't customers. Then 6 would come, the register chiming as the last customers left, and the bookstore would fall into a hush that felt like the building sighing. By 8 there was activity downstairs again. Light under the door of the storeroom, which River called her studio, would appear and the smell of turpentine would begin to seep up through the floorboards, growing stronger as the evening progressed. Sometimes there was music, usually something instrumental, classical, or ambient. Sometimes there was silence except for the sound of River moving around the space, the scratch of a brush against canvas, the clink of jars. This rhythm became the framework of Maya's days. The first time she went downstairs on purpose, it was on a Thursday evening about 2 weeks after she'd moved in. She'd been reading in her room, but the light was starting to fade, and she was too restless to turn on the overhead lamp and commit to the evening. Instead, she'd found herself getting up, moving downstairs, pushing open the door to the bookstore's main floor. It was different at night than it presumably was during the day. The afternoon sun slanting through the front windows was replaced by a softer glow from the interior lights, creating pools of brightness in an otherwise dim space. The books looked different too, somehow more precious, more like artifacts. The store had that smell that bookstores have, the one that makes people emotional. Aged paper, leather bindings, that particular perfume of possibility. River wasn't at the front counter. Maya could see the light from under the storeroom door, could hear the faint sound of music. She stood in the middle of the bookstore for a moment, aware that she was intruding, and then she pushed open the storeroom door. River's studio was a revelation. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that had structure underneath. The walls were covered in canvases in various states of completion, some barely sketched, others nearly finished, one or two that looked like they'd been abandoned mid-thought. There were shelves everywhere, packed with books that had nothing to do with the store downstairs, with art books and poetry collections and technical manuals about color theory and composition. Drop cloths covered most of the floor, painted in their own palimpsest of colors, and there were jars of brushes, tubes of paint, palettes in various states of drying, sketches tacked to every available surface. It smelled like turpentine and linseed oil and creativity itself, if such a thing had a scent. River was standing in front of a canvas that was mostly shadows and one slash of impossible blue, a blue that seemed to contain light within itself, that suggested water or sky or some emotion that didn't have a name in English. She was wearing the same overalls, now with a smudge of that impossible blue on her shoulder, and she was completely absorbed in her work, the way people get when they're touching the thing that makes them feel alive. Sorry, Maya said, and River spun around so quickly she nearly knocked over a jar of brushes. I didn't mean to startle you, I could smell the paint and I was curious. No, it's fine, River said, and her smile was immediate and genuine. I'm always happy to have an audience. Fair warning though, the work sucks right now. I'm in that phase where I'm trying to do something I don't fully understand yet, which usually means a lot of false starts and weird angles and probably some genuinely bad decisions. What are you trying to do? Maya asked, moving closer to the canvas. Up close she could see the structure underneath the chaos. The composition was a landscape, maybe, or a portrait of emotion rendered as place. There were figures suggested in the shadows, something that might have been architectural in the lines of the blue. Attempting to paint what sadness looks like, River said, still looking at the canvas rather than at Maya. Which is maybe ambitious considering sadness is different for everyone, but I'm trying to find the shape of it anyway. The texture, I guess. What does it feel like to be inside sadness? Not grief, I've painted grief and that's sharp and defined. But sadness is slippery, it doesn't sit still for portraits. Maya stared at the canvas. The more she looked at it, the more sense it made. The blue was definitely sadness, not the dramatic blue of tears, but the blue of the sky on a day when you realize it's been raining for weeks and you've stopped noticing. The shadows were the weight of it, the way sadness makes everything heavier. What made you try? Maya asked. I mean, it's a big feeling to attempt to pin down. River finally glanced back at her, and there was something vulnerable in her expression. Does something have to make you try, or is it enough that you have to? Like, I can't not try, even when I don't know what I'm doing, even when it's probably terrible. There's something in me that needs to make things, needs to translate what I'm feeling into something external. If I don't do it, I feel like I'm going to explode or disappear or something equally dramatic. It was the kind of answer that should have sounded self-indulgent or pretentious, but River asked it like she genuinely wanted to know if Maya understood, like the answer mattered. Maya found herself nodding, even though she wasn't sure she did understand, not entirely. She'd spent 3 years in publishing trying to work with other people's creations, trying to shape their words into something marketable, and it had hollowed her out. She'd never made anything herself. The act of creation felt like something that happened to other people, people with talent and drive and certainty about what they wanted. I think, Maya said slowly, I think I understand, or I want to. River set down her brush, the one with that impossible blue on it, and turned to face Maya fully. You want to understand sadness? I want to understand the drive, Maya corrected. The need to make something even when you're not sure it'll work, that seems like its own kind of courage. River's expression softened. You should stay, she said. Not forever, just tonight. I'm going to make tea and then I'm probably going to stare at this painting for another hour and mutter to myself about color theory. But you should stay while I do it. It's less depressing with someone else in the room. So Maya stayed and it became a pattern. By the end of the first month, Maya had developed a routine that involved the bookstore in ways she hadn't anticipated. It started innocuously, borrowing a book she needed, asking River a question about where something was shelved, staying for a conversation that turned into an hour and then two. Eventually, without anyone explicitly saying it should happen, she started helping in the store. It began small. River would ask her opinion on whether a section needed reorganizing or if she knew where a customer had last been looking for a particular title. Then it became, could you watch the register for 10 minutes while I deal with a delivery situation? And then, I'm completely behind on inventory, would you mind checking some of these box counts? Before long, Maya was covering shifts. She was never quite sure when it had become official, when her occasional help had shifted into something more like employment, but somewhere around week 4, River started leaving her a key and a shift schedule. "It's not much," River had said almost apologetically the day she handed it over. "But you're here anyway. And the store needs someone, and I figure you might as well get paid for it rather than just doing it out of the goodness of your heart." "I don't have much goodness," Maya had said, and immediately regretted it. She had a tendency to make jokes out of her own dysfunction, which generally made people uncomfortable. But River had just smiled. "Everyone has goodness," she'd said. "It's just sometimes easier to see other people's than your own." The bookstore itself was proving more interesting than Maya had expected. Meridian Books was small, maybe 800 square feet of retail space, but every inch of it had been deliberately curated. The books weren't organized by the standard Dewey Decimal nonsense that most bookstores used. Instead, River had created her own categories. There were the expected sections: fiction, mystery, science fiction, poetry. But there were also sections like memoirs about people finding their way home, and books that changed my life, and things to read when you can't stop crying. "Do people actually look for books that way?" Maya had asked once while shelving returns. "You'd be surprised," River had said. "Especially the crying section. Last month someone came in and asked specifically for books about belonging, and I was able to direct them to like 20 options just from that one shelf. People come in looking for feelings, not subjects. They just don't always know how to ask for it." There was something beautiful about that approach to bookselling, something that suggested River understood that books weren't just products to be moved. They were solutions to problems people didn't always know how to name. The problem was that the more time Maya spent in the bookstore, the more time she spent around River, the harder it became to maintain the necessary distance. The careful walls she'd constructed after New York, the ones that were supposed to keep her from being hurt again, from investing emotionally in something that could fail, were developing cracks. Somewhere between the second and third week of her official employment, Maya's easy admiration of River's passion and creativity and general way of moving through the world had transformed into something more complicated, something that kept her awake at night. She started noticing things that had no business being noticed. The way River's fingers found the spines of books with an artist's precision, as if she could feel the individual letter of each title even when her eyes were elsewhere. How she listened when customers talked about what they were reading, actually listened, with her whole attention focused on them, not just waiting for her turn to speak or thinking about her next task. The specific shade of brown in her eyes, warm like aged wood left out in the rain. The way she hummed while shelving fragments of jazz or folk songs just under her breath. The sound of her laugh, genuine and unself-conscious, the kind that made you want to do something funny just to hear it again. The fact that River always remembered how Maya took her coffee. 2 sugars, a generous splash of oat milk, black tea in the afternoons instead of coffee because she got jittery. River had figured this out in the second week and never wavered, always pouring the exact right amount of milk before asking, always having the tea ready if it was after 2. It was the kind of attention that should have been simple, but to Maya, who hadn't been really known by anyone in 3 years, who'd built her whole New York life on not being fully present with anyone, it felt seismic. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after she'd moved in, Maya came home from her shift to find a note taped to her door. "Thought you might want to know there's a book downstairs with your name on the reading list," it said in River's handwriting, which was neat and precise with little flourishes on the capital letters. "Check the things to read when you can't stop crying section, it's the one with the teal cover." Maya's heart had done something complicated in her chest. She'd gone downstairs immediately and found the book, a collection of essays by Ocean Vuong about family, identity, and the ways love saves us. She'd opened it randomly and read the first passage, and her eyes had filled with tears. That night, she'd brought the book down to River's studio, where River was working on something new, a portrait maybe, though it was still mostly sketches and blocked colors. "Why did you recommend this?" Maya had asked, and her voice had come out smaller than intended. River had set down her brush. "Because I've watched you reading in the store and I can see the moment when a book hits you. And I've seen you trying very hard not to let it hit you, like you're testing whether you're allowed to feel things. I thought maybe you needed permission. Permission to feel things, Maya had repeated. Permission to let them affect you, River had clarified. To be moved, to let books do what they're supposed to do, which is change you. That night, Maya had read the entire essay collection through until 3 in the morning, and she'd cried, truly cried, for the first time since she'd arrived in Portland. She'd cried for the failure of her New York life, for the career she thought she wanted and discovered she didn't, for the relationships she'd sabotaged with her cynicism and distance, for the fact that it was taking moving home to a small bookstore above her childhood neighborhood to remember that she was capable of feeling things. And she'd cried about River, though she'd tried very hard not to, because that was a complication she wasn't ready for. The next morning, River had made her coffee without being asked and had left it on her nightstand with a note that said, "The essays get better. Also, you're allowed to feel things. I'm pretty sure there's no rule against it." That was the moment Maya had understood that she was in trouble. By month 3, they'd fallen into a rhythm so natural that it felt like they'd been doing it forever. Morning coffee together in the apartment, River would emerge from her room around 8:30, and Maya would usually already have something brewing, mugs ready, the kitchen warming with caffeine and possibility. These mornings became sacred to Maya in a way she didn't quite understand, couldn't entirely explain to herself. They'd sit at the small table by the window that looked out onto the neighborhood waking up. River would sketch in the margins of the newspaper. She was obsessed with the newspaper, with physical media in a way that seemed almost anachronistic, but she loved the texture of the pages, the way print smelled, the permanence of it. The sketches were usually tiny, unconscious things: buildings and trees, people on the street, sometimes abstract designs that turned into something else the longer you looked at them. They'd discuss what was happening in the neighborhood. There was a new coffee shop opening 3 blocks away, the community garden was organizing a winter crop project, the city council was in some controversy about development, what books were selling well at the store, what needed to be fixed in the increasingly creaky old building. River would mention that the pipes were making sounds again, or the upstairs light fixture was flickering in that concerning way that suggested electrical problems that neither of them wanted to think about. Maya would listen and offer solutions, having become, through some accident of her presence, the person who called contractors and dealt with practical problems. River would listen and offer art-related observations, stories about customers, philosophical thoughts about existence that shouldn't have worked as breakfast conversation but somehow did. The afternoons meant work. Maya would usually head to the bookstore around noon, and they'd operate in that efficient silence that longtime coworkers achieve. River would be at the front counter maybe, or in the back checking inventory. Maya would shelve returns, help customers find books, handle the register, exist in the space next to River in a way that felt increasingly like natural habitat. The evenings meant River in the studio and increasingly Maya joining her. It had started as a convenience. Maya would bring a book downstairs to read while waiting for River to finish so they could head to bed at the same time, maintaining some kind of structure to their shared living situation. But it had evolved into something more intentional. She'd sit on an old stool that River had dragged into the studio, a stool that had presumably been used for something else before, and she'd work on a project of her own, sometimes her laptop, scrolling through job listings she had no intention of applying to or reading articles about the publishing industry she'd left behind, sometimes a book, sometimes just sitting quietly while River painted. And sometimes they'd talk, the way artists and careful observers do when they've learned the language of quiet, when silence becomes as important as words. River would tell her about pieces she was working on, the struggle of trying to get a color right, the frustration of having a vision in your head that your hands couldn't quite execute. Maya would listen and occasionally offer observations, though she was careful not to overstep, not to offer criticism that hadn't been asked for. Sometimes River would play music. Lately it had been more instrumental stuff, Nils Fromm, Max Richter, Olafur Arnolds, the kind of music that doesn't demand attention but rather creates a container for thought. Sometimes they'd talk about movies they'd seen or wanted to see, books they'd both read, thoughts about the neighborhood, observations about the particular way Portland's rain changed with the seasons. The thing Maya was discovering was that quiet with the right person felt like a kind of communication all its own. The problem was that the quiet was becoming increasingly loud with everything she wasn't saying. She'd lie in bed listening to the sounds of the building settling around her, aware that River was 2 rooms below her, working in the studio or reading or sleeping. She'd catch herself starring during their morning coffee ritual, just long enough to register the curve of River's cheekbone in the early light, the way her hair caught the sun coming through the window, the specific expression that crossed her face when she was thinking about something that mattered. She'd time her shifts at the store around River's schedule, which was completely pathetic, and she knew it. She'd notice when River wore the overalls with the paint stains because they'd become a symbol of her moving from the structured world of the bookstore to the unstructured world of her art. She'd find herself volunteering to work evenings which were quieter, which meant she and River could drift naturally from one space to another, from store to studio, from public to private, without anything feeling orchestrated. She'd made a conscious effort to keep her distance, to maintain the boundaries that felt increasingly necessary. She kept her bedroom door closed more often. She didn't suggest going to dinner or doing things outside of their shared spaces. She was careful about the duration of their conversations, conscious of the line between friendship and something that could become complicated. It wasn't sustainable, this careful balance. November arrived with its particular Portland brand of gray. The sky became a study in absence of color. The rain took on a different quality, heavier, colder, like the sky was finally addressing the months of gentle precipitation that had come before it. The neighborhood shifted accordingly. The trees shed their leaves into the gutters, clogging the storm drains in beautiful patterns. The evenings came earlier, darkness settling by 5, transforming the bookstore's evening hours into something lit primarily by interior light. In late autumn, the store became different. It developed a particular coziness that hadn't been as pronounced in September and October. People came in wanting to get warm more than wanting to browse. They bought hot drinks from the small coffee station River had set up. They lingered in the chairs River had arranged for reading. They seemed to want the bookstore to be a refuge from the weather and the approaching darkness. River responded by making the space more intentionally comfortable. She added string lights around the high shelves. She started a playlist called November Books that was all quiet, thoughtful music. She put out a bowl of candles for customer use, encouraging people to light them as they browsed. It was during this season of increasing darkness and enforced coziness that something shifted in Maya's carefully maintained distance. She'd been working a particularly slow Thursday evening, watching the rain run down the storefront windows in sheets, when a customer came in asking for recommendations for their teenage daughter. "She's not really reading anymore," the mother said, with the particular frustration of someone who didn't understand how their child could have become a stranger. "She's always been such a voracious reader, but now she just wants to stare at her phone. I thought maybe if I found her the right book." River, who'd been shelving in the back, emerged and took over the conversation with a smoothness that suggested this was far from the first time she'd handled this particular parental concern. "Reading isn't for everyone," River said, and the mother's face fell, but River continued, "But stories are. Sometimes a story finds you in a different form, comics, graphic novels, animation, even poetry if it hits right. What does she care about?" "Art mostly," the mother said, her expression softening slightly. "She's always drawing, it's the one thing she seems to actually care about." "Then I have exactly the thing," River said, and she moved through the store with purpose, pulling 3 books. A graphic novel about the Japanese art world, a collection of illustrated essays, a book of poetry by an artist River apparently knew personally. When the mother left with her small stack, she was smiling, and you could see the shift in her shoulders, the relaxation of someone who'd been handed a solution they hadn't known how to find. Maya came to the register where River was updating the inventory system, her fingers moving across the keyboard with the same precision they used when painting. "That was kind," Maya said, surprising herself with the comment. River shrugged, but there was color in her cheeks and she wasn't meeting Maya's eyes. "Just trying to match the reader with the story," she said. "That's the whole point, isn't it? Finding the exact right book for the exact right person at the exact right moment in their life." "Is that what the bookstore is to you?" Maya asked, leaning against the counter and crossing her arms. She was testing something, she realized, testing how much honesty River would allow, matching people with stories. River finally looked up from the screen, and something in her expression shifted in that way it had been shifting more and more frequently lately. A softening, a deepening, a kind of seeing. "It's meant to be," she said quietly. "When I inherited this place from my aunt, I thought about closing it. The online retailers have killed so many independent bookstores and the margins are terrible, and honestly I could make more money doing anything else. But my aunt left me a note when she updated the will. She said she'd always imagined the bookstore as a kind of matchmaking service for books and people. She said the best bookstore experiences she'd had weren't when she bought bestsellers, they were when someone took the time to find exactly what she needed without her knowing she needed it." River set down her hands on the keyboard, fully abandoning her task. I wanted to create a space where people could find exactly what they were looking for when they needed it. A small miracle, that's it. That was always the dream. A small miracle. Maya thought about that phrase for 3 days straight. She thought about it while shelving books, while sitting in the studio watching River paint, while lying in bed listening to the rain outside her window. She thought about how River saw the bookstore as a space for small miracles, how she created that space deliberately with intention, how she saw people, truly saw them, and tried to give them exactly what would matter most. "You're quiet," River said on the third day, one evening while they were both in the studio. Maya had brought down her laptop and she was supposedly working, though really she was just sitting there thinking about miracles. "More quiet than usual, which is saying something. Are you okay?" "Yeah," Maya said, and it came out smaller than she meant it to. "I'm just thinking about something you said, about small miracles." "Yeah." River set down her brush, turned around on her stool. She was working on a new piece, something that was still mostly sketches in charcoal and blue oil paint, something about the human form rendered as landscape. "What about it?" "I'm not sure I believe in small miracles," Maya said, which wasn't quite what she meant, but it was close. "My whole life I've believed in big things, big career, big achievements, big transformations. Small things always felt like they didn't matter. But lately I keep noticing all these small things that do matter, and I'm not sure how to reconcile that." River was quiet for a long moment, then she set her palette down and moved to sit on the stool next to Maya's. "I don't know if this will help," she said slowly. "But I think maybe the problem with chasing big things is that they require you to sacrifice everything in the meantime. You have to defer your actual life until you reach the goal, whereas small miracles, they're always available. They're happening right now, all the time, you just have to slow down enough to see them." "Is that what you did?" Maya asked. "Slowed down enough to see them?" River smiled, and it was sad in a way that suggested there was a story behind the question, something about loss or failure or learning. "I had a lot of help," she said. "My aunt helped, and honestly painting helped, because you can't paint and be in a rush. You have to be present with the work, present with the canvas, and once you learn to be present like that, it's hard to stop. It bleeds into the rest of your life." "I wish someone had taught me that earlier," Maya said. "In New York, I was always rushing, always on to the next thing. I think I was so focused on getting somewhere that I forgot to actually be anywhere." "You can learn now," River said, and she said it so gently that Maya's chest tightened. "You're here, you can learn it now." The conversation stayed with Maya in the way that conversations do when they've touched something true. She found herself slowing down without meaning to. She'd be shelving a book and read the back cover, genuinely read it, thinking about whether this book would speak to a particular customer who'd been in earlier looking for something undefined. She'd make coffee with more attention to the temperature, to the pour, to the moment when River would receive it. She'd pause during their mornings together instead of mentally moving to the next task. She'd sit in the studio and actually pay attention to the way light moved across River's face as she worked, the way her expression changed when she was solving a problem, the grace of her movements. It wasn't sustainable, this careful balance she was trying to maintain between acknowledging what she felt and pretending it didn't exist. But she wasn't ready to tip either way, ready to either address it or to let it go. So she existed in the liminal space between, trying not to think about it while simultaneously unable to think about anything else. December arrived with unseasonable warmth, which meant the rain became heavier, as if the sky was trying to make up for the missing cold. The bookstore began its holiday transformation, garlands appeared on the shelves, and River handwrote gift guides that filled the windows, books for your estranged sibling, memoirs that will make you believe in the future again, poetry for people who are falling in love. Maya noticed that last one and had to look away. "I need your help," River said one evening about 2 weeks before Christmas, finding Maya in the apartment. River was covered in glitter, which somehow only made her look more beautiful, the tiny sparkles catching light in her hair on her overalls scattered across her face. "I'm doing holiday decorations, but I've realized my vision is bigger than my execution ability. Also, I apparently can't figure out how to use a ladder without almost dying, which is limiting." "You used a ladder?" Maya asked, alarmed. "Very briefly," River said. "Mostly I stood at the bottom holding it, but yes, I need help. Are you available?" Of course Maya was available. She was always available for River, which was its own kind of problem, but she'd stopped trying to pretend otherwise. They spent the evening hanging lights above the bookshelves, and River played holiday music, not the commercial stuff but beautiful renditions by jazz singers and folk musicians. They decorated together, River pointing to where she wanted things and Maya executing the vision, and somehow in the process of reaching for lights and adjusting decorations, their hands kept brushing. By the time they were done, the bookstore looked like a small miracle itself, warm and welcoming and full of subtle beauty. Not the mall chain version of Holiday, but something that felt real and intentional and true to River's aesthetic. "It's perfect," River said, stepping back to look at the result. "You're really good at executing visions. Has anyone ever told you that?" "In New York, people mostly told me I was good at crushing other people's spirits," Maya said, which was meant to be funny but came out bitter. "That can't be true," River said, and she said it with such certainty that Maya actually believed her. "No one who takes this much care in the small details could be spirit-crushing. You're the kind of person who makes things better just by being attentive to them." Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stood together in the decorated bookstore, holiday light reflecting off the glass windows, and for a moment it felt like anything could happen. The moment passed, River broke away and headed toward the back. "I'm going to make us hot chocolate," she said. "Real hot chocolate, not the powdered mix. You wait here and enjoy what we made." So Maya sat in the empty bookstore, surrounded by holiday lights and the smell of old books, and tried very hard not to think about the way River looked at her sometimes. The way that made her believe for just a moment that maybe River felt something too. Part 2, Tangles. December held its breath. The weather couldn't decide if it wanted to be winter or to persist in the mildness that had characterized the fall. Some days brought actual snow, unusual for Portland, and the whole city seemed confused by it, turning into a kind of winter theme park where people who didn't know how to drive suddenly had to, and the charming old buildings looked like postcards from another era. River's studio became increasingly cluttered with holiday projects. She was painting gifts, Maya realized after a while, small pieces for people who mattered to her. A landscape for someone Maya didn't know, a portrait that seemed to be of River's own face but rendered as something else, not quite human, not quite spirit. Studies in emotion, Maya thought, studies in the people River loved. The question of whether River loved her in any capacity beyond friendship was one that Maya had stopped asking herself directly, though it lived in her consciousness constantly, a low hum underneath everything else. The problem was that December brought with it an intensification of everything. River seemed busier, more energized, painting with a kind of fervor that suggested she was working through something. When Maya asked if she was okay, River just smiled and said she was inspired by the holiday season, by the way people wanted to give each other things that mattered. "Most of the gift guides are just me trying to read people and figure out what would matter to them," River admitted one morning over coffee. "Like someone comes in on December 10th looking panicked because they haven't found anything for their mother. And I watch them for a while and I ask questions and I try to figure out who their mother actually is underneath the title. Because if I get that right, I can find a book that will mean something. That will say, I actually see you." "That's a lot of pressure," Maya said. "What if you get it wrong?" "Then they return it," River said with a shrug. "But I'd rather try and risk failure than play it safe and definitely disappoint them." It was the kind of philosophy that made sense coming from River, who'd built her entire life around the principle of attempting things that mattered even when they might not work. But it also made Maya's chest ache because she'd built her life on the opposite principle: play it safe, don't risk what matters, keep your real self hidden beneath layers of cynicism and distance. The tension between her way and River's way was becoming increasingly obvious to her, and she didn't know how to reconcile them. One evening, about 3 weeks before Christmas, Maya came home after her shift to find River making pasta in the apartment's small kitchen. River was wearing headphones, singing along to something Maya caught fragments, something about winter and coming home and love. River was focused on the task, completely absorbed, and Maya found herself standing in the doorway watching her for a moment longer than was probably appropriate. "Oh hey," River said, noticing her and pulling out one earbud. "I was going to text you but my hands got covered in flour. I'm making dinner. I thought maybe we could actually sit down together like a real meal. I feel like we've been existing in the same space but not really. Together, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. It also made Maya's heart do something complicated in her chest. "Yeah," she said, keeping her voice level, "that sounds nice." Dinner turned out to be an elaborate affair. Fresh pasta from scratch, sauce with basil and garlic, a salad. Even bread that River had apparently made the night before. She'd set the small dining table carefully with candles and actual cloth napkins, and the entire apartment smelled amazing. "You went to a lot of trouble," Maya said, sitting down. "I like cooking," River said, serving pasta onto their plates with the care she brought to everything. "It's like painting, actually. You have all these elements: color, texture, flavor, presentation, and you have to think about how they work together. And then someone eats it and gets transformed for a moment, and that feels like a miracle too. They ate in the kind of comfortable silence that had become their default, the kind where words would feel like an interruption. When they did talk, it was about small things. Whether the basil was too strong, River thought maybe. Maya said it was perfect. What was happening in the neighborhood: the new coffee shop had opened and apparently had a line out the door, a funny customer interaction from the bookstore. By the time they'd finished eating and cleaned up, a process that involved them moving around each other in the small kitchen with the kind of synchronization that suggested practice, it was getting late. River suggested they move to the couch and they settled with tea and an old movie. It was a romantic comedy, which would have felt pointed if River hadn't picked it at random from the stack by the TV. Halfway through the movie, Maya realized that she and River were sitting closer than usual. Not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of River's presence, close enough that she could smell the paint and soap that always clung to River's skin. When the movie hit a particularly comedic moment, River laughed that genuine laugh and her shoulder brushed against Maya's. Maya didn't move away. When the movie ended, neither of them made a move to turn it off or change the channel. They just sat there in the quiet of the apartment, the TV casting a blue glow across the room, and for a moment the air between them felt charged with something that might have been only Maya's imagination but felt distinctly real. "You okay?" River asked, tilting her head to look at Maya. "Yeah," Maya said, which was a lie. She wasn't okay, she was very much not okay. Every moment of the last few months felt like it was leading somewhere she wasn't sure she was prepared for. Just tired. Work was long. River nodded and didn't push, but something flickered across her face, something that might have been disappointment, might have been relief, might have been some complicated combination of emotions that Maya couldn't quite read. They separated for the night shortly after, and Maya went to her room and lay in the dark, listening to the rain and thinking about the way River had looked at her, the way she'd moved closer. She thought about the dinner, the careful way River had set the table, the presence of candles. She thought about whether any of it meant what she wanted it to mean, or if she was projecting her own feelings onto innocent gestures from someone who was just being kind. The problem was that River was deliberately kind, which made it impossible to know where kindness ended and something else began. Christmas came, and with it, a shift in the rhythm of their shared life. The bookstore was busy with last-minute shoppers, and Maya found herself pulling longer shifts, working alongside River in a kind of controlled chaos. Customers came in panicked and left with solutions. The gift guides worked, people found exactly what they needed, and the bookstore became the kind of place where miracles happened, small, unremarkable miracles that nonetheless changed someone's day or week or understanding of themselves. On December 23rd, late in the evening after they'd closed the store, River pulled out a wrapped package from behind the counter. It was small, wrapped in brown paper that River had obviously decorated herself. There were hand-drawn stars and moons covering the entire surface. "I got you something," River said, and her voice had a nervous quality to it that Maya had never quite heard before. "I don't know if it's weird since we live together and work together, but I wanted to get you something anyway. You can open it now or wait until actual Christmas morning, whatever feels right." Maya took the package, acutely aware of how it felt in her hands, solid but light, warm from wherever River had been keeping it. "I didn't get you anything," she said, feeling a spike of panic. She hadn't actually. She'd been too confused about what would be appropriate, too caught up in her own feelings about River to navigate the practical question of gift giving. "That's okay," River said, and she smiled, that smile that made her look younger, more vulnerable. "I don't need anything, but I wanted to give you something, so you're allowed to just accept it." Maya opened the package there in the empty bookstore, the only light coming from the holiday decorations they'd hung together. Inside the brown paper was a small canvas, maybe 12 inches by 12 inches, painted in River's recognizable style. It was a portrait, though not of any particular person. It was abstract enough that you could read it as landscape or as human form, depending on how you looked at it. The central color was blue, that impossible blue that River loved, the kind that suggested both sadness and hope. Around the blue were layers of softer colors, gray, cream, hint of rose. At the bottom, River had written something in white paint, "For Maya, because you're learning to see small miracles." When Maya looked up from the painting, River was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was hope in it, definitely, and vulnerability, and something else that looked terrifyingly like fear. "I don't know what to say," Maya said, which was true and inadequate. "You don't have to say anything," River said. "Do you like it?" I love it, Maya said, and then immediately regretted the word choice. Love was too big, too much, loaded with implications. I mean, it's beautiful, thank you. You're welcome, River said, and something in her expression shuddered just slightly. She turned back to organizing the register. Merry Christmas, Maya. Later in her room, Maya hung the painting on the wall where she could see it from her bed. The blue seemed to glow in the darkness, and she lay there staring at it, thinking about small miracles and learning to see them. Thinking about River. Thinking about the fact that they were running out of time to address the thing that was becoming increasingly obvious, increasingly unavoidable. Christmas morning came quietly. Neither of them had made a big deal about it, but River had left a gift on the kitchen counter anyway, a book. A poetry collection by someone Maya had mentioned liking. River had inscribed the inside cover, "Read this, think about the line on page 47, we should talk about what it means." Maya turned to page 47 and read. What is the cost of being seen? What is the cost of love that doesn't ask permission? What is the cost of living in a body that wants to give everything to a person who might not want it? The cost, I think, is the risk of being rejected, the risk of being wrong, the risk of loving someone who doesn't love you back. But maybe that risk is the price of being alive. And Maya understood with a clarity that made her dizzy that River had arranged for this exact moment. That River had deliberately chosen a book with a specific passage because she needed to say something, needed to communicate something that words alone couldn't quite convey. She sat down at the kitchen table and read the entire poetry collection in one sitting, and by the time she finished, the rain outside had shifted from light to heavy, the kind of Portland rain that felt like the whole city was crying. River found her there, surrounded by the pages of the book, tears running down her face. Hey, River said softly, sitting across from her at the table. Hey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry, that was probably too heavy-handed, wasn't it? I can just... No, Maya interrupted. No, it's perfect, but River, I need to know the line on page 47. What does it mean to you? River took a breath, and in that moment before she spoke, Maya saw her gathering courage, saw her making a choice to risk something. It means, River said slowly, that I'm terrified, that I've been terrified for months, that I know I'm probably misreading everything, probably projecting, probably making a huge mistake and even thinking about saying this to you, but I can't keep pretending anymore. I'm in love with you, Maya, I have been for a while. And I understand if you don't feel the same way, and that's okay, but I couldn't let another day go by without you knowing. The words hung in the air between them, and Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at River's face and see the vulnerability there, the courage it had taken to say those words, the absolute terror of having said them. How long, Maya asked, because that was the only question her brain could form. Since before you moved in, River said. Since the apartment viewing, actually. When you made that joke about the kitchen being aggressively beige, I knew I was in trouble. But you hired me, Maya said. You let me move in. I did, River agreed, because I thought I could manage it. I thought I could keep my feelings separate, keep things professional and friendly and comfortable. And I did for a while, but getting to know you better just made it worse. It made the feelings stronger. And by month 2 I was actively trying not to fall further in love with you, which was difficult because you were literally living in my house, existing in my spaces, becoming the person I wanted to be around most. Maya stood up and started packing, unable to sit still. This is, River, this is. Too much? River asked quietly. I know it's too much, I'm sorry, I should have been more careful about. No, Maya said, and then she stopped, because she needed to actually think about what she was feeling, not just react. She pressed her palms against her eyes and tried to slow down. No, it's not too much, it's terrifying, but not because it's unwanted. When she dropped her hands and looked at River, River had gone very still. I'm in love with you too, Maya said, and the words felt enormous and fragile and necessary. I have been for months, I didn't know how to do this, I didn't know if you felt the same way, and I was afraid that if I acknowledged it I'd lose you, I'd lose the friendship and the stability and the person who makes Portland feel like home. You have me, River said, standing up. Not instead of the friendship or the stability, but in addition to those things. I'm not going anywhere, Maya. I'm not asking you to choose between what we have and something else. I'm asking if maybe we could see what it could be if we let ourselves. Maya moved toward her, closing the distance that had always felt necessary to maintain. I don't know how to do this, she said. I'm not good at relationships. I left New York because I sabotaged everything I cared about. I'm not sure I know how to be in love with someone without destroying it. Then we'll learn together, River said. Because I'm not good at a lot of things either, but I'm good at being present with things I care about, and I care about you, Maya. I want to be present with whatever this is. And then they were kissing, and it was softer than Maya had expected, more careful. It tasted like the fear they'd both been carrying, like relief, like the moment when something shifts from potential to real. River's hand found Maya's face, her thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with a tenderness that made Maya's breath catch. When they finally pulled apart, the rain outside had intensified into a proper storm, and the whole world seemed reduced to just the two of them in the kitchen, surrounded by open books and possibility. I'm terrified, Maya said. I know, River said, I am too, but we can be terrified together, which somehow makes it better. Part 3 Integration. The days after Christmas felt like they existed outside of normal time. The world continued, people went to work, it rained, the days grew shorter and then imperceptibly started growing again. But for Maya and River, everything was concentrated in the small apartment above the bookstore, in the spaces between words, in the tentative moments of learning each other in a different way. They didn't sleep together, not immediately. Instead, there was a process of increasing intimacy that happened gradually, naturally. A hand held on the stairs, a kiss in the hallway, the decision to sleep in River's room, though the sleeping was secondary to the holding, to the way they could be close in the dark without the pressure of being seen. Work continued at the bookstore, but it felt different now. There was a weight to proximity that hadn't existed before. A brush of hands when handing over a book felt significant. A glance across the store carried meaning. The other employees, Meridian had 2 part-time staff besides Maya and River, definitely noticed, though they were kind enough not to comment directly. But there were knowing smiles, small adjustments to the schedule that gave Maya and River more shifts together rather than fewer. On New Year's Eve, they closed the bookstore early and climbed the stairs to the apartment. River had made plans, she'd decorated the living room with lights and candles, had made a dessert that involved chocolate and caramel, had set everything up in a way that felt both romantic and casual, low pressure. They watched the ball drop on television and kissed when the countdown reached 0, and it felt important, that kiss. It felt like a beginning or a continuation or both simultaneously. I want to tell people, River said later as they sat on the couch with tea, the sound of celebrations outside their window. About us. I know we've only been together for a week officially, but I want people to know. Okay, Maya said, surprising herself. She would have expected to want more time, more certainty, more evidence that this was solid before broadcasting it, but the thought of hiding it, of pretending around people they cared about, felt suddenly impossible. Yeah, okay, but maybe we tell the people who matter first. River's best friend Anya came first. She worked in graphic design and had known River since college, and she screamed when they told her, actually screamed and then immediately apologized for screaming but not for being excited. I have been waiting for this for literally years, she told them. River has been insufferably in love with you since before you moved in. Insufferable. I've had to listen to poems about your existence, Maya. Poems. River blushed so hard that her entire face turned pink, and Maya felt something tender unfold in her chest at the sight of her embarrassment. Then came Maya's parents, which was actually less fraught than expected. They'd known River through the bookstore, it was a neighborhood staple, and they were the kind of parents who supported local business. Her mother, always one to read subtle cues, had apparently already figured it out based on the way she smiled when they told her. I'm happy for you, her mother said, and she said it in a way that suggested she meant it completely. River's clearly someone special. By mid-January, the secret was out to anyone who mattered, and the world continued to turn. The winter deepened, and with it came a different kind of rhythm to their shared life. They'd settled into patterns that felt natural. River would wake earlier, would go downstairs to the bookstore and start setting up. Maya would follow an hour later with coffee, and they'd spend the morning together in those calm hours before customers arrived. On slower afternoons, if there was a lull, Maya would slip into the back and they'd have stolen moments. Kisses between the stacks, hands held while talking about inventory, the small affections that seemed to matter more in a bookstore somehow. The evenings still belonged to River's studio, but now Maya was invited in differently. She wasn't sitting on the side watching, she was integral to the process. River would play music and they'd talk about the pieces, and Maya would offer observations that were genuinely considered rather than tentatively suggested. Sometimes River would start a painting and then ask Maya to come look at it, not because she needed help, but because she wanted her perspective. "What do you see?" River would ask, and Maya would study the canvas, and they'd talk about it for hours sometimes, about color theory and emotion and the way certain combinations of tones could convey specific feelings. It was in one of these conversations, about 6 weeks into their relationship, that River admitted something that had been weighing on her. They were sitting in the studio late at night. River had been working on a large canvas all evening, and it was finally coming together when she set down her brush and turned to face Maya directly. "I want to move forward," she said, "not in a rushed way, but I want to think about sharing a bedroom permanently. I want to think about what happens next. And I'm scared because usually when I want to move forward with someone, that's when things fall apart." "Why?" Maya asked. "What happened?" River was quiet for a long moment. "I was married," she said finally. "Years ago, before I inherited the bookstore, we were together for 6 years, married for 3 of them. And I thought it was going somewhere, that we were building something. But he wanted me to give up painting. He said it wasn't practical, that I should get a real job, that the art was just a hobby, and I chose the art. I chose that instead of the relationship." "That doesn't sound like a mistake," Maya said carefully. "It wasn't," River agreed. "But it meant I was alone for a long time, and then my aunt got sick and I came back here to help her run the bookstore and she left it to me. And I rebuilt, basically. Built this whole life by myself and got very accustomed to it being just me. And then you moved in and it was fine, and then it was complicated, and now it's, I want this, but I'm scared that wanting something is how you lose it." Maya moved to where River was sitting and took her hands. "I'm not going to ask you to give up painting," she said. "I'm not going to ask you to be anyone except who you are. I know who you are, River. I've watched you be you for months, and I'm falling in love with that person every single day." "Yeah?" River asked, and she sounded young and uncertain in a way that made Maya's heart ache. "Yeah," Maya confirmed. "I'm falling in love with who you are, so let's not worry about what happens next. Let's just be here, let's share a bedroom and see what happens." "We can keep your room," River said. "Like for your studio or your office or whatever you want it to be, but maybe we move your stuff into my room, make it ours." "Okay," Maya said. "Yeah, that sounds good." The transition happened over a weekend. They moved Maya's belongings gradually, making space for her in River's room, which had been cluttered with art supplies and half-finished projects, until they organized it together. The room transformed, her books next to River's, their clothes hanging together, the space becoming a genuine shared geography. The night of the move, they slept intertwined, and it felt significant, that first full night together in a deliberately shared space. Maya woke sometime around 3 in the morning. She still got insomnia occasionally, though less frequently since arriving back in Portland, and lay there watching River sleep, studying the planes of her face in the darkness, committing her to memory. River stirred, sensing somehow that Maya was awake. "You okay?" River murmured, not fully awake. "Yeah," Maya said. "I was just thinking I'm happy. That's not something I ever expected to say about my life again, but I'm happy." River reached out and pulled her closer. "Good," she said. "Be happy, you deserve happy." Winter stretched on. The rain continued, relentless and gentle, and the bookstore became even more of a refuge. They were into the slow season now, post-holiday, the time when people made resolutions about reading or self-improvement or simply finding comfort in stories. The section River called New Year, New You spiritually, became a popular destination. It was in February that the bigger question of logistics came up. River brought it to dinner, which was not yet a regular weekly thing but was becoming more frequent. They'd fallen into a pattern of cooking together on Sunday afternoons, preparing meals for the week. "I've been thinking," River said, stirring sauce that smelled like garlic and tomato and home, "about the future. Like longer term, what if we stopped pretending to have separate lives? What if we just fully merged everything, or at least acknowledged that we're building a life together here, above the bookstore?" "Are you asking me to marry you?" Maya asked, which was meant as a joke but came out more serious. River laughed. "No, I mean, possibly eventually, but I'm asking first if you want to do this. If you want to build a life here in Portland, with me, in the bookstore above it, however we figure it out." "I do," Maya said, and she meant it completely. "I came back here thinking I was coming back to failure, but I think I was actually coming back to something, to you maybe, though I didn't know it, to home." "Good," River said, "because I've been thinking about some renovations, nothing major, but the apartment could be better. We could take down that wall between your old room and my studio, make it a proper studio space. We could renovate the kitchen. Maybe take over a bit more of the basement for storage if the landlord allows it. You want to invest in this? Maya asked, surprised. I want to invest in us, River said. I've been scared to do that with anyone for a long time, but with you, it doesn't feel scary. It feels like the most logical thing I've ever done. So they started planning. They met with contractors and drew sketches and talked about what the space could be. Through it all, the bookstore continued. Spring came, and with it, the neighborhood began to shift. People spending more time outside, the cafe culture emerging, the particular joy that comes when rain finally stops being a constant fact of existence. One day in early March, a woman came into the bookstore looking for something specific. She was middle-aged, professional-looking, and she asked for help finding a book for her wife. She left me, the woman said quietly to River while Maya was shelving nearby. Years ago, we were together for 12 years, and one day she decided she wanted to start over, and now she's contacted me again. She wants to try again, and I don't know what to do. River took her seriously. She asked questions, listened to the answers, and then pulled a collection of essays. Read this, she said, but specifically this page. She marked it with a post-it note. Later, when the customer left, Maya asked River what she'd recommended. Something about second chances, River said. About whether love can survive time and distance and change. About whether you can be the same person you were and also transformed by everything that's happened. I think she needed to know that it's possible to love someone again even after a break, even after you've already learned how to live without them. Do you believe that? Maya asked. I do now, River said. I didn't think I did before I met you, but I do. April brought real warmth, the kind that made you believe summer was possible. The bookstore's front door was propped open more often, the smell of the neighborhood, coffee from the cafe next door, the particular green smell of the community garden starting its season, the exhaust of cars and buses mixing with the smell of books. The apartment renovations were scheduled to begin in May, which meant a period of temporary chaos. River had hired a contractor friend of her cousin's, and for 2 weeks the space became a construction site. The wall between the studio and the former guest room came down and the apartment transformed. River's art supplies moved to a larger space. They created a dedicated studio area that was beautiful and functional in equal measure. When the dust settled and the workers had left, the apartment was smaller in some ways and larger in others. It was undeniably a shared space now, with none of the vestiges of separate lives. Anya came over to see the finished product and brought a bottle of wine. This is beautiful, she said, wandering through. You two have actually built something here, haven't you? We're trying, Maya said. Anya turned to her. River said you're writing again, like actually writing, not just thinking about writing. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was true, over the past 3 months she'd started working on a novel. A real novel, not just ideas or fragments, but a full manuscript with a plot and characters and an actual plot arc. It was set in Portland, and it involved a bookstore, and it was about learning to come home to yourself. Just exploring, Maya said. It's probably terrible. Can I read it? Anya asked. When it's done, Maya promised, if it's any good. It's good, River said, and she said it with such confidence that Maya had to look at her. I've read the pages. You're a good writer, Maya. You always were. You just had to remember how to be brave. By the time summer arrived, their life together had solidified into something that felt inevitable, like it had always been going to happen this way. The bookstore was busy with tourists and summer reading lists. The neighborhood was alive with outdoor patios and street fairs, and the particular energy that comes when a city remembers it can be beautiful. Maya was mostly finished with her novel. River had read the whole thing now, and so had Anya, and they were both encouraging her to submit it to agents. She was hesitant, still caught between hope and fear, but she was thinking about it more seriously. River was working on a large commissioned piece, a mural for a community center in Southeast Portland, something about resilience and community and belonging. She was doing sketches for it in the studio and would present them soon. It was a big project, the biggest of her career so far, and she was nervous in a way that was endearing. What if I'm not good enough? She asked one night, standing in front of her sketches. You are, Maya said simply. I've watched you work. You're incredibly good. But this is different. This is permanent. This will be on a wall for years, and people will see it every day, and what if they hate it? Then they'll hate it, Maya said, and you'll have done something brave anyway. That matters more than the outcome. River was quiet for a moment. When did you get wise? I'm not wise, Maya said. I'm just in love with someone who's taught me that it's better to try and fail than to not try at all. The mural commission came through. River was elated and terrified in equal measure, which meant she threw herself into the work with characteristic intensity. She spent days at the community center, sketching out the design directly on the wall, then began the process of actually painting it. Maya would often pop over during her lunch break or on evenings when the bookstore was slow, watching River work, bringing her water and snacks, being present in the way she